On this episode of Locked On Lightning, the Lightning are within one game of going back to the Stanley Cup final. We talk about their amazing win at the Garden on the road, beating the Rangers. Rangers suffering their first loss at home since the first round. We'll talk all about that and more. But first, let's play that music.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Denker. I'd like to thank all of you for making us your first listen of the day. If you're watching us on YouTube, then I would like to thank you for making us your first watch of the day. Please go ahead and like and subscribe to the pod. Follow us wherever the podcasts are distributed audio-wise. Go on YouTube and subscribe to the channel there. On today's episode, we'll recapping last night's fantastic win, 3-1 win at the Garden on Broadway under the bright lights of New York City. The Lightning take Game 5 after being down 2-0 in this series, come all the way back to win 3 in a row, and now have themselves within one win of going back to the Stanley Cup final. So last night's game, starting off, and I will say this right here, I told a couple of people before the game, I know it's Game 5 and you still potentially have 2 more games to play after this, but this felt like a Game 7 because of the implication of the Lightning possibly going into a must-win survival game back at Amalie if they fail to win this one. And at the same time, the Rangers as well, a team who had Tampa, the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champion, on the ropes to start the series, completely losing grasp or control of this series. And you started to see it, the mood change, not only from the Rangers in this game, but from the fan base. And I've spoken about this throughout the entire series about how Ranger fans on social media, and I'm from New York, so this comes as no surprise to me. But still, you would have thought for a team who hasn't been this far into the playoffs since 2015 that you would have had a little bit more humility as a fan base. But Lightning were down 2-0, and then going into Game 3, you would have thought that the Rangers were one win away from going to the Stanley Cup final, just by the way this fan base was reacting. And I'm not going to sit here and bash on the Ranger fan base, absolutely not, because that's not what we're here to talk about. But a lot of people, not just Ranger fans, just people who watch hockey in general, it seemed like a lot of people at that point, which was weird to me. We're already counting out the Lightning. They were saying, well, this team is cooked. They've played so many games over the last couple of seasons. They finally run out of gas. Whatever phrase or description you want to use to say that the Lightning are pretty much done. And if you watch the earlier episodes from around then, for a couple of days ago, you kind of almost feel the confusion in my voice when I spoke about it, just because it's we've had instances through the course of the National Hockey League where teams just run out of gas. We saw it when the Penguins were in the middle of trying to three-peat, and of course that didn't happen. But I just you gotta remember that the one thing that the Lightning have is a very strong veteran core leadership. And I think a lot of people forget about that when they look at this team, when they look at, and I've been a culprit of doing this as well. Even when you look at this team, what we've seen, the struggles that they've gone through during the regular season, not only this year, but over the last couple of years, we oftentimes forget about how important having that core is, and having this group of guys is. And you've seen in times, whether it be Steven Stamkos or Nikita Kucherov or Victor Hedman, or it not only starts with them or ends with them. You just go down the line. Guys like Andre Palat, who've been here for a very long time, Andre Vasilevsky. It always seems in the big games, whether it be the regular season or last night, that there's always someone who's been here for a very long time that comes up big, that rises to the occasion. And last night it was Mikhail Sergachev and Andre Palat. Andre Palat, of course, we know in game 4 coming up big with that game-winning goal in the closing seconds. And then again last night, doing a fantastic job of once again scoring, which, to be fair, I really, I knew that went off the Palat, but it just to get, and I don't really think at the end of the day the players really care about this, but I think it was so important, and I've stressed this throughout the entire playoffs. It was so important to get this defensive core involved offensively. And we saw Victor Hedman fire off a couple of shots last night, really force the issue, which you love to see. I would just more like to see him, take the puck a little deeper into the to the high slot. But to see Mikhail Sergachev, who has struggled immensely throughout this playoffs, there has been times where he has just not looked good on the ice. He is. There's been times where, and oftentimes we've seen this during the regular season, Mikhail Sergachev, who signed a big deal a couple of years ago, right after the Lightning won in the bubble, has not really lived up to the expectations of that contract. I mean, he's played well, but we haven't really seen him take that next step just yet to what we thought he was going to take in terms of his long-term potential. But I think that this was fantastic to see him do this, especially after some of the mistakes that we have seen him make over this run thus far. Giving up pucks in the neutral zone, giving up pucks in your own zone, just his carelessness with possession, and to see him score, and even at the end of the game, you saw just the way he was shooting the puck. How important that was just to see him have that swagger. He had 3 shots on goal last night, which I cannot overstate the importance of that, especially for a player like Sergachev, who he's not going to score 20 goals a year, but to get him on a kind of a little bit of an offensive role, hopefully this does lead to something like that, especially if the Lightning do close things out at Amalie in game 6 on Saturday night. And to, once we look forward to the Stanley Cup final, which I'm not going to yet, obviously the job isn't done yet here with the Rangers, but what a great game last night. Andre Vasilevsky played fantastic last night, saving 24 or 25 shots. He really bailed out the Lightning a couple of times there early on, where I think if the Rangers capitalize on those chances, I think this game obviously probably would have swung the other way, and we would be having a completely different view and conversation right now. But he played very well, and on the other side of that, I thought the guys in front of him as a whole played very well in front of him. There was a couple of times where, and a lot of it you could see there was a lot of traffic in front of him at times during the game. And oftentimes when it hits a guy in front, you kind of get caught out of position. That's what leads to those second and third chance goals. And the guys in front of him did a very good job of not only minimizing those chances, but clearing the puck when they needed to. And then on the other side of that, when they failed to clear the puck, Vasilevsky rose to the occasion and took care of business. So a great game all around. This is the kind of game that the Lightning most of the time win. And what I mean is it's those hard fought, just chess match kind of games. This was a 3-1 game. And I saw a viewer on YouTube actually comment saying, it's crazy how we don't really count empty net goals. But I mean, listen, in the grand scheme of the game, that's a freebie. I'm not going to sit here and dispute the legitimacy of empty netters, but at the same time, 3-1, them winning 3-1 is, to me, in this situation, the equivalent of them winning 2-1. I mean, it's really doesn't make that much of a difference. But a great game, top to bottom. I thought everybody played well. There was a couple of chances there that with Kucherov during the course of the game and this has been a thing all series, and I'll talk about this after the break, but really he needs to shoot the puck more. He needs to be more aggressive. He needs to be more selfish, as one fan or listener tweeted out to me. So we'll talk about that, some of the other things that we saw from this game, and then look forward towards Game 6 in just a bit. But first, I want to talk about our first and only sponsor of the day, and that is BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting stats and sports info. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. They got the latest odds on fighting news, NHL conference finals, basketball, NBA finals, MMA, UFC, and boxing. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. So once again, thank you for all of you for listening, the enthusiasm that you've shown towards this show in watching, listening, being involved, tweeting to me during games. Very much appreciate it. Keep up the good work. Tell your friends, tell your cousin, tell whoever at work to go ahead, like and subscribe to the pod. Give us a follow on our social media pages as well, at @LO_Lightning on Twitter, as well as @LockedOn_Lightning on Instagram. Give me a follow on Twitter at DenkyDank, DENKYD8NK. You tweet to me, you ask me a question about the Lightning, you want a question answered on the show, just tweet it to me. I'll either answer it there or I'll answer it on the next episode. And don't forget to like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. So going back to, or actually continuing the conversation about last night's game, like I said, a very, very good game all around. Not a lot of mistakes were made last night, which in a game like this, there's so little room for mistakes to be made. There was some other stuff that happened at the end of the game, which I'm not going to talk about because yes, those were penalized, which is kind of dumb because why are you going to give penalties when the game is over? I've never really understood that. If it warrants a suspension, it warrants a suspension, but I don't even know why bother. Very low calorie game, really. With really the only penalties we saw were in the second period. Hooking on Braden Schneider, too many men on the ice, which Corey Perry served, which I would just like to take a minute and yeah, we could sit here and dispute all day long till the cows come home who is the better goaltender, Igor Shesterkin or Andrei Vasilevsky, and we all know what Vasilevsky could do. We've watched him all season long. We've watched him the last 3 years. We've spoken about it in the last 3 years on this pod, pretty much yelling on a yearly basis how he's gotten robbed in the Vezina Trophy category. But I just like to take a minute because I haven't watched a whole ton of Igor Shesterkin this year, and other than the times really when the Lightning have played the Rangers in those games in which Shesterkin has played, and then obviously this series, that too many men on the ice penalty, that was completely on him. And what I mean by that is that he has possession of the puck, and Tampa is in the middle of a line change, and Shesterkin, instead of throwing it down ice to a teammate or passing it off to a teammate, he throws. And I've never seen this before. I've probably watched tens of thousands of hockey games. I mean, I can even sit here and try and quantify how many games I've watched, but I've never seen a play in which a goaltender has had that smart of instincts to and wherewithal to throw the puck towards the opposing team as they're making the line change and draw a too many men on the ice penalty. I've never seen that happen, and that that was one of the few times where I've been taken aback and very, very impressed by a hockey player. It's one thing to be very good skills wise and to be able to know when to pick your spots to do A, B, and C, but to play the game smart in that way to get an advantage. I was very impressed. So kudos to Igor Sturkin on that. And then you had Keandre Miller hooking against Corey Perry. Ranger fans were a little incensed about um, some of the things that happened during the game, especially later on. Um, and my response to all of that is you guys just can't pick and choose what to be upset about, because I guarantee you, if it was a play, I believe in the third period, Truba, who Jacob Truba, I don't have a problem with him being physical. I mean, that's something that you're gonna see, especially in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I'm not worried about that. I mean, the Lightning are gonna give it, so they're probably gonna take it as well. And Jacob Trouba has laid some big hits, not really so much in this series, but leading up to this. And um, I don't understand. I mean, you can't just say like, the Lightning are playing dirty or whatever that, and then just completely gloss over the play where Trouba is skating up ice towards Andre Palat with a full head of steam. And if Palat doesn't trip, Trouba will take his head off with his elbow. And I spoke about it on the last pod with Locked On New York Rangers host John Chick. I think the refs have done a phenomenal job for the most part in this series. Um, just kind of setting the tone and not taking crap from players, and really officiating in a way where things have not gone out of hand, but we're not sitting here through a period and having 4 or 5 penalties be called. If you remember back to the Toronto series, that was an absolute nightmare. But I think that the officials are going to be a lot more aware of that now that it's kind of more out in the open, and there's a prime example of that happening. There has been a couple of hits that Trouba has laid in this series where it looks like he's led with his elbow, which, I mean, it hasn't resulted really in a player being hurt, so I'm not really worried about it, and I wasn't really upset about it in the minute in that moment. But just something to keep an eye on in Game 6. I wouldn't be surprised if Trouba gets a penalty here or there early on. And speaking of tough guys, which was surprising, Ryan Reeves didn't play in this one. He was scratched. Kevin Rooney played in his spot for the Rangers. I was surprised that Gerard Gallant elected to go with Rooney, who could score a little bit more, do a little bit more on the power play, but taking your one of your big guys out there, one of your big physical presences, I didn't think that was a good idea, especially just, in the case that if something like this happened, like what we saw at the end of the game, which we'll end the show talking about that. But I'm curious now, since the Rangers dropped Game 5, will we see Ryan Reeves in Game 6, and will we see a little bit more physical play, not only from the Rangers, but if we'll finally get that tilt at the end of the game between Reeves and Maroon, which I wouldn't be surprised if the Lightning are up and they're up by a couple of goals or so, we might see it. I think if we're talking about this game being just one goal apart, I don't think we'll see it. I don't think the Rangers will want to risk taking an instigator penalty. But yeah, just a very interesting move from Gerard Gallant. You kind of, I would have figured you want to kept with the same lineup all series long. So yeah, overall, very good game. I thought the Lightning played a very good game fundamentally. I thought they were very disciplined. I thought they weathered the storm and the big sequences when they were presented with them. Um, I would have liked to have seen one more goal, one more legit goal. And what I mean is just, not an empty netter. I would have liked this to have been 4-1, just to get a little bit more confidence in them heading into Game 6. But then again, they're playing at home at Amalie, a place that they have played pretty much, for the most part, played well all season long. So we'll hope and see. Hopefully, they can continue the momentum Saturday night, and then we'll get a couple of days off before the Stanley Cup final, and then on to Colorado. So to wrap things up, we're going to talk really quick about that little skirmish, if you want to call it, at the end of the game. A lot of players mixed up in it, and I spoke about it before, how They called penalties on these guys, which never made any sense to me why you would call penalties against players at the end of the game if there's no more time on the clock to serve it. Penalties called on Chernak, Fox, Strome, Lafreniere, and Stamkos. And we all know that Steven Stamkos could play physical when the situation calls for it. But wow, him going up against Lafreniere, 2 first overall draft picks, kind of a cool stat there. He that was basically a kind of welcome to the NHL playoffs moment, I think, for Alexis Lafreniere, going up against Steven Stamkos, and Stamkos just like letting him know, hey, I'm still one of the big dogs on the ice right now. Which, I mean, Stamkos has played fantastic this entire season as well as the playoffs. But to put it simply, and I try to not curse or anything on this show, but to put it simply, and Ranger fans, I'm sure will think differently, but he beat Lafreniere's ass, and that was a statement. Believe it or not, that is a statement by the Lightning that they're not going to get sucked into the little ridiculousness of end of game theatrics or extracurricular activities. I think that's something that going into, after I just got done saying that we might see possibly, if Reeves plays especially, there might be some sort of potential or lead up to more physicality in game 6, because we kind of got away from that in game 5. And look what that happened. The Lightning were able to play their game, and the Rangers at times just couldn't keep up. The Rangers played well early on, and they controlled the majority of the puck possession, especially in the first period. But as the game went on, and as the Lightning started to get into the groove of things, you saw that the Rangers just weren't able to handle it. They weren't able to play at that level consistently. And I think that was a part of the reason why we saw at the end of the game, what we saw happen. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is a precursor to what we'll see early on in game 6. And now that I think of it, if Reeves plays, especially after what we saw at the end of game 5, I'm curious as to what the chances of what there will be if Maroon and Reeves fight literally at puck drop. That's something interesting to keep an eye on, especially on the opening puck drop. If Gallant and Cooper kind of just give each other a nod, and then you see those 2 lines out there against each other, and Maroon and Reeves lined up next to each other. So definitely keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I think we're going to see the Rangers play a little bit more physical in this one. You're going to see a little bit of a chippy game early on in game 6. I think that the Rangers realized that as the game went on, they kind of got away from the physicality of it all, laying hits very early on. They couldn't just strictly beat the Lightning with pure puck possession, because eventually the Lightning are just too good of a team to just be held to that sort of game. And you saw it in the second and third periods. So I think we're going to see some penalties early on. It's going to be a little bit of a slow first period. The refs are going to try and really button down the hatch on the theatrics of play, and not try and get this game out of control. So keep an eye on that, and we'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode as well, because now that I'm thinking about it, I would not be surprised whatsoever if we see a lot of big hits be laid early on in this game. So once again, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the pod. Give us a sub on the YouTube channel. You guys have been doing fantastic, and hit that notification bell, because as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll get the notification and you can watch. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Denker. I'll talk to you in the next one.